Do you ever feel stuck? Do you ever feel like you're not reaching your full potential? Today on the show, I have Dr. Stanley joining me, and he has this incredible story of how, through a series of choices and circumstances, he ended up with really the potential and the probability of being life in prison. However, through some mentorship and some words that ultimately brought him to belief and brought him to resiliency and inner strength, he ended up not staying there, but he ended up getting out, holding an MBA, holding a PhD, practicing medicine, teaching, and really with an incredible story as now an author, speaker, and doctor. Lean in and listen.
Welcome to Advance with Mike Acker, the podcast designed to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals alike break through barriers by improving their practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Your host is a best-selling author, executive coach, and founder of the Advance Public Speaking School and Advantage Publishing Group, two companies dedicated to providing an edge for leaders. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Now here's your host, Mike Acker.
Hey, welcome, Stanley. I'm so glad that you are part of Advance with Mike Acker, and we're going to be telling your story today. Welcome.
Yes. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving into this because you have a new book out here that tells all about your story, called From Prison Cells to PhD. And I'll put that in the show note. But without diving too much into that right here, tell us, you are now a PhD, MBA, doctor, author, all these kind of things, professor, but it didn't start out that way. It started out with really some really tough moments. So take us back in time to when you were growing up and you started making some not so good choices.
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me. I'm originally from the Ferguson area in North St. Louis. Growing up, I started making some pretty poor decisions at a pretty young age. I got into selling drugs before I was even a teenager. Arrested for the first time at 14 and moved into the criminal legal system. I continued making, some poor decisions that led me deeper into the legal system up until the point that I was sitting in a courtroom in my early 20s, looking at 20 years to life in prison for drug trafficking charges. By that time, I had amassed 3 separate felony convictions, and I had a prosecutor pushing for 20 years to life because she felt that I had no hope for changing the decisions that I had been making up until that time. And she actually sentenced me as a career criminal, which is the 3 strikes law of Missouri. So I had 3 separate felony convictions. So she actually hit me with this career criminal statute, which changed my sentencing from looking at 5 to 15 to 10 to life. And, she was pushing for 20 to life. To take you back, a little bit even before and a little more about, my childhood. Again, a lot of people know about the Ferguson, Missouri area now. The DOJ report that came out that showed that there was excessive policing and over-policing and excessive fines to try to, people were incarcerated for just multiple types of fines. So, all that stuff came to light, and looking back at it, I was like, wow, like I was a part of all that. Like I didn't really know that was going on. For me, I always saw cops around in my neighborhood. I can remember as early as 8 years old, running from the cops and just, cops being around. And for me and all of my friends, they were the, bad people or the people that were out to get us at least. There was always this police presence, and I grew up with this. For me, I thought it was, I live in a neighborhood that is primarily Black, and I know some folks that sell drugs and, do some things that aren't quite illegal or aren't quite legal. So that must be why there's excessive police around here, because there's criminals around here. I was not aware that there was intentionally more police here in this area as opposed to, some other areas. So, I have that in the background as I'm growing up as a child. There's always cops around. So that means because there's always criminals around. Um, and, in school, as early as in elementary years, I was getting, being put in detention and suspension and labeled as kind of the troublemaker. And, going into middle school and high school, I was almost kicked out of high school because I had so many detentions and suspensions. And, by that time, I mentioned I was already dabbling into selling drugs. And, in school, even before that first arrest at 14, I was already seen as a criminal to many of the authorities in my life in terms of like the teachers and different folks within, the community. So I was already kind of feeling like a criminal before I even got the actual tag as one. So when I got the actual tag as one at 14 and moved into the juvenile system, it was almost like a rite of passage or, something that was just normal for people that came from the areas that I came from. So it wasn't even seen as like, it didn't hit me like I need to make change because it just hit me as like, this is pretty normal. That also tied in, I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. My athletic talents were definitely like nurtured and developed, and I had some awesome coaches, and even those coaching experiences really helped me through my prison experience, the kind of intestinal fortitude and resilience that they instilled in the coaching methods that they coached us by really helped during prison. So I had some great coaches, but there wasn't really much in my life that was nurturing my intellectual capabilities. So I really hadn't tapped in. I mean, I really hadn't seen me using them towards academics. Now I had begun using them towards like hustling, and I tied into being labeled as the criminal, society, culture, different things telling me I'm supposed to be a criminal. And then tied into that, I'm actually, I'm pretty, I have some intellectual capacity. So I ended up started making a lot of money selling drugs because, I was in this culture that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I was actually pretty, smart and savvy. And so, I ended up, by the time I was 19, making lawyer doctor money. Like I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling drugs. And then by that time I had gotten too deep in this like machine that I couldn't find a way out, even as I was trying to find a way out. And then I subsequently had a couple of charges and convictions. And, I found myself sitting in that courtroom, looking at life in prison, and this prosecutor painting a picture of me being this dangerous threat to society.
So at a young age, I mean, you were really groomed in a sense towards this life of being a criminal. And even though you had some good people alongside coaching you physically, you didn't have that nurturing. I think I like how I mean, like is not the right word, but I like how you use your mind to be very successful in the endeavor you put yourself to. Unfortunately, that endeavor was not something that was going to be nurturing for you. So where did this end up?
So I'm sitting in this courtroom, and I have a prosecuting attorney saying that I'm going to be in this revolving door of incarceration. That I had already. It was my third felony conviction. I had on my second conviction, I had a stint of shock incarceration. And, so she's painting the picture that this kid really I'm just a kid at that time, and I still look relatively young, and you can imagine like how young I looked in my at that particular time in my early 20s. So just a little kid, and but she was painting the picture that we don't need to. This is not some little kid. This is this dangerous person who is used to running around with people that carry guns. The amount of drugs that he's selling is not some nickel and dimer that you might think of that we see with other drug crimes. This is someone who is poisoning our community and is dangerous. And so she was wanting to put me away for life. And I had a defense that was trying to say the opposite, like that this is just a kid that still has potential, and we don't want to is there a way that we can mitigate? Like, he's made some poor decisions.
Yeah.
And the judge, what the prosecutor was the prosecutor tied the judge's hands by successfully getting me as a career criminal, because the lowest thing that the judge could actually give me was 10 years. So in the judge's eyes, she granted me mercy and gave me the lowest thing that she could give me based on how the prosecutor was successfully able to hit me with this 3 strikes law. So, I was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And, hearing that was just kind of this out of body experience. My family and I are Haitian. So, we're an immigrant family. My parents came over here. The first language I learned was Creole. So English was, the second language that I really learned in the household. Our primary language was Creole. And when my parents came here to the U.S., they really, didn't have a network of support and friends. Our family was all that we had. I'm the youngest of 5. And so, her youngest kid is being sent away to prison. And, this is all she's ever known is her family. So she's in the courtroom and she's bawling in tears. And when I finally kind of come back to, I asked the judge if I could, give my mother a hug before I, started my sentence. And the judge denied me the opportunity to give my mother, this one last hug. And, by this time I had 3 felony convictions. I had already done shock incarceration. I'd been in and out of courtrooms. But it wasn't until then that it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that the system doesn't see me as a person. It doesn't see me as a human. It doesn't see me as someone who's deserving of respect and civility to go hug their mother. You are just scum. You're a criminal. And you don't get the rights of citizenship. You don't get the rights of being a human. And, they shackled me and handcuffed me and took me off. And I battled with that thought of like, that couldn't be like, the system, it's the justice system. Like, they couldn't view people that way. But then I learned just daily, day in, day out, every minute of the day of incarceration and being in prison is this new reinvention of dehumanization. They find a new way to dehumanize you almost every single day. And it's like this repetitive thing. So, for most people that go through incarceration, it's like this completely, like, it just beats you down in terms of psychologically, mentally, emotionally, to where you no longer have any feeling of self-worth or self-value or purpose. And, that can just linger on for years for people. And you've been sitting in that for so many years. Like, changing that is one of the biggest challenges of incarceration, and was for me. So I went into prison just feeling, I didn't quite like this prosecutor, who was this, white lady. I actually got sentenced in St. Charles, Missouri, which is slightly outside of St. Louis and is a predominantly white area. So, they had this young Black kid selling a lot of drugs, moving into this primary, from this Black area moving to this primarily white area, that had an aspect of playing into the situation, particularly since, this was a young prosecuting attorney who was trying to move up the ranks in her profession. And, to do that, the highest position in that profession is an elected official that gets elected by the people in that area. The people in that area had just moved out of St. Louis during some white flight that was taking place. So they moved away from, Black individuals in the city in North St. Louis. So, it was an aspect of the situation was, we have to stop this movement of Black people out here. So there's some of that playing into it. And whether she actually thought I deserved a life sentence, I don't quite believe that. But it would be beneficial to her to sentence certain people more harshly in terms of her advancement in her career. Nonetheless,
you got the choirs going, getting frustrated at 6. No, I see it's this juxtaposition of all these different things, right? You got what's happening culturally. You have other people and their own career path. You have, of course, the decisions that you made. You have the migration of your family and the lack of support there. So there's all these different things culminate, which is generally the case, right? Generally the case of a big decision, whether it's good or bad, is generally a culmination of a whole bunch of different factors.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of negative things that came to this point. And so you become this person that gets caught up involved in all these decisions, personal, corporate, cultural, all these things, and you end up in jail. And really with a probability at that point in time of just being a lifelong member or resident of the justice system. So how did you get, because I started out by saying that you're a doctor, medical doctor, you're a PhD and MBA, and you hold both of those and you did those simultaneously. Then you release a book through Post Hills Press. You have a family. Obviously, you're not in jail. You're visiting family right now in Missouri. So you've created quite this life for yourself. So how did you, what happened?
A to B.
Where was this turning point that got you away from going down, 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 down and started your upward journey?
Yeah. And so, I was mentioning what I was mentioning about the prosecutor, just to say, like, although all those things going on and I didn't quite like her, but I did respect her and I did believe her. But I think more detrimentally is that, I believed her. So because she had this level of authority, I truly believed that what she was saying about me being irreparable and that I was going to be in this revolving door of incarceration, I believed it. So, 70% of people that walk out of prison within, 3 to 5 years end up stepping back into prison. So, the reality of what she was saying was heavy, that once you come into this club, you kind of stay there. Like the way society is set up, it's hard to get out of that. Even once you're released from prison, most people end up going back to prison. So that was weighing heavy on me. And I believed, the things that she said about me were mostly true in terms of the things that I had done. And so I felt as if I was this terrible, bad person. And that was very heavy. And, I went into this very dark place that, really led to me having some really dark thoughts about, no longer being here and having suicidal thoughts. And what was my kind of saving grace was I had this mentor who stepped into my life that kind of saw a different trajectory. He saw me using those talents, potential, and intellect in a different way. And he started investing in that potential. He started, putting money on my books to have conversations with me. He started sending me information and articles.
While you were incarcerated?
While I was incarcerated. And, that tied with, while I went, over the course of the first couple years that I was incarcerated, my father's health plummeted, and he was in and out of surgeries and hospitalizations, and had several amputations, and ended up losing his battle with type 2 diabetes. And it was this emotional distress that really led to me wanting to learn more about diabetes. There was a level of guilt that I had, that I felt that somehow my dad was relatively healthy. We kind of fell off because I was making all these poor decisions. And then next thing I hear is like he's, in a hospital bed dying. And I couldn't shake the fact that somehow it was tied to me. So I had this level of guilt. And as I'm, death, dying, sickness, all these things are kind of difficult things to deal with in any situation. But when you're locked in a cage, it becomes this like exponentially more difficult thing. And, some of the examples that I often give is when you think about grief, one of the stages of grief is anger, and like getting mad and yelling and like, just wanting to like maybe grab a pillow and scream or something like that. You can't just start screaming or yelling at somebody or in someone's presence in prison. That could literally, lead to dangerous harm being brought to you, right?
Yeah.
So, you can't really get mad unless you're ready to get into a fight or an altercation. You think about sadness, another one of the stages of grief, often comes with crying. You can't just sit there and bawl and cry in prison. That can be seen as weakness and also can bring harm your way. So when you think about the stages of grief in prison, there's really not a space for that. And
Wow.
what I found was that a lot of people like dealing with grief of not being able to see their kids, of significant others, moving on and seeing other people, of, parents or family members dying.
Yeah.
What ends up happening is there's nowhere to deal with that grief, and people end up acting out, and they end up getting into altercations, and they end up diving into prison culture and doing these different things as a means, because they don't have a channel to deal with grief that they're dealing with and trauma that they've been through.
That's just pause right there for just a moment, because I've never really thought about that right there. I mean, obviously I have friends and I've known and I've worked with people and I've done visits. I did mission work for a long time and would go in and visit the high prison in
Yep.
Mexico where we grew up. So I've been in these environments, but I've never thought about that right there, what you said. Like, you can't get angry, you can't get sad because of the harm it could bring you. So you
Right.
can't even go through the natural psychological ways of dealing with it.
Right.
What did
Yeah.
you do? I mean, I know you were going
So
to.
yeah, so that's what for me it was. I ended up having this mentor start. I read my first scientific article on diabetes while I was locked in this cage. So if you're to you or your viewers, if you've ever picked up a scientific article, like every other word except for and the is like something you've never heard of. And in prison, there's absolutely no dictionaries or way. You can't go to the internet, so there's really no way to learn it except for like taking time. And so it would take me like weeks, even months, to just go through one article that were, these articles are 20 to 30 pages long or so, but very dense with medical terminology. But what that did was, although my body was physically locked in this prison cell, my mind was freely roaming around the human cell. I always imagine like this is, the magic school bus for, folks that can remember the magic school bus.
Yeah.
And when the episode where they went into like the stomach and they're going all around, I felt like I was just touring the human cell, and it just was like this freeing thing that I was no longer locked up when I did that.
Yeah.
And that led me to, so the mentors stepping in and believing in me, this difficult situation with my father taking place, and me kind of transforming that into wanting to learn more, not knowing that I was going to take that anywhere, because I'm now an endocrinologist who studies diabetes. But at that time, I was learning just to be learning and just to kind of free myself from prison. But those things tied in with allowed me the opportunity to get away from some of the prison culture and really let me dive into myself. And that's where I think, I leaned on my faith at that particular time because, there was still in the back of my head that you're going to be in this revolving door of incarceration. Like everybody, and I didn't even know the exact percentages like I know now that, I just told you 70%. For me, what I thought was like 100%. Like once you're in here, like you just 100% of folks just keep coming back because I saw it. Like I would see people leave and then a couple weeks later, like, why are you back, man? Like, well, so it was, I thought that was reality. So that was a difficult thing to overcome. But these, different things going on, this mentor, me diving into learning more about diabetes and then leaning on my faith that really said that, I can do this. I started believing in myself that I can do this. Like what this mentor is telling me, like maybe he has something there and maybe it's true. And that was a turning point. And from there, like I was dead set on, getting back into education and, moving forward when I got back.
I think there's just 4 common things that you brought out here, that 4 different sources were doing the same thing, but with different outcomes. So you had the power of words, what people were saying. The prosecutor says, you are a hopeless cause. You can't do this. And I think for most people listening, they're never going to have a prosecutor say, well, hopefully they're never going to have a prosecutor say you are hopeless. You're going to be incarcerated all your life. I'm sure there are people as well who have. And yet at the same time, we've all had somebody say, you can't do this. You're not going to amount to this. You're hopeless. For me, it was people saying, you're the class clown. I didn't want to be the class clown, but people were saying, you're going to be the class clown. This is just who you are. This is your identity. And so you kind of start living that out. And then the second source of words is yourself and what you do with those. So if she says this, you start saying, I am a hopeless cause. But then the turning point of the mentor saying, now I can see something different in you. And then your mind going back and revising. And then you'll ultimately have the Bible, faith, God. I come from a Christian background as well. I was a pastor for years. And a lot of people know that from my books and such. And from there, you have this outside, this bigger than you saying you are more than conqueror and going, and you align your thoughts to what these 2 sources said instead of what this source, which is albeit very powerful. So your words change. And is that what you mean when you talk in your book about the inner strength? Is that where your inner strength primarily came from what you believe?
Yeah. And I would say, as you kind of mentioned, I wrote the book and I think my story has power beyond just people who've been to prison. It's as you were just mentioning, it's not, you may have not had that prosecutor in your life, but you've had something or someone in your life that is kind of holding you back, or is this roadblock, or is this barrier. And what does it take to get over that? And so that's, in an essence, part of the message of finding that inner strength and finding that source of energy that can help you get over it. And I had a couple of things in terms of the support that I had, but also like diving into myself to learn more about me and allowing myself the space to say, I'm not going to let the outside influence me. I'm going to let myself determine, what it is that I want to do with me. I had a lot of people and sources telling me what I could do, and I finally, changed up, and I no longer kind of went through the prison culture, and I freed myself from thinking that I had to move in certain ways that you have to move in prison, which, ultimately, some of the things that I explain in the book, could have put me in kind of harm's way to not follow prison rules. But I had freed myself to say, I'm going to live the way that I want to, and I know that God wants me to. And if that doesn't follow prison rules, then I had the strength of knowing that there was a higher power looking over me. And if something happened, I was okay with that something happening, having been in the right and knowing that I was doing, knowing that I was, doing good. So if harm came to me from doing good, I came to this place that I was okay with that. And that was kind of this big turning point in a place where there's a lot of harm that goes around inside prison. So to come to that type of thinking was like this deep thing inside of me that said, there's no more, like, I can't live this way anymore. This is the way. I don't want to do these things that harm others or harm myself. I just want to be the source of good.
So you had this turning point, you had this realization, you started getting on this path, you start reading, you start getting out of this, and then what happened? How did you get out?
Yeah.
How long did you?
Yeah. So all that was, I jokingly always mention, so the title of the book is From Prison Cells to PhD. It's Never Too Late to Do Good. And I hope to tell you a little bit about the It's Never Too Late to Do Good part.
Yeah.
The From Prison Cells to PhD is also the name of the nonprofit that I ended up founding with some individuals that I was incarcerated with.
Nice.
And that nonprofit works with about 100 plus individuals per year to help them pursue higher education. We get about 500 applications per year. We have over 300 volunteers. We have a footprint in 34 states. We actually have some folks internationally that connect with us. So we're, been fortunate enough to raise a good amount of money, and we're, 30 plus people on the team, over 85% of which are formerly incarcerated. So, we're making impact in the world. And that's something that is just brings me a great amount of joy. But sitting in prison with one of the folks that, kind of co-founded the organization and the idea, when I first brought it to him, and I had made this change and he hadn't quite made a change yet. And I would tell him, like, I'm going to get out and I'm going to be a doctor, man. Like I'm reading these articles, and they would see me reading like way into the night, and they kind of joked about how much I read and things like that. And we were in like this heart to heart moment, like walking the track. And, so he didn't say anything at the time. He just was like, yeah, man. Yeah. But later on, he ended up like joking, like telling some friends, like, this dude said he's going to be a doctor. You hear how crazy this is? And it was just like this running joke with some of the friends that I was hanging out with. Like, yeah, you're going to be a doctor. Do you see where we're at? Like, people don't even like leave this place. Like, and you're saying you're going to leave and be a doctor.
Yeah.
So it was like crazy. But then, so in all that time, I was, when it was time for me to, when I saw that I had an out date, I began putting together a bunch of applications to continue my education. And it took literally months and months to put these together because all the complications of not having internet on the inside, mail coming into the inside when I, had folks contact these colleges and they send me packets. The packets have over 5 pages. They have like 50 pages. In fact, like, an application has all the information, and you can only have 5 sheets of paper per mail parcel. So they kept getting rejected. And at first I didn't know why they were getting rejected. I thought like at first that, they were intentionally rejecting them.
Yeah.
And then I found that I had to have friends on the outside actually break down the packets into 5 pages and send me like 10 pieces of mail just for one application. I ended up applying to 7 places. So you can imagine, like, I have this like influx of mail, and even still, I ended up getting a few violations for having too much mail. And, it was really just this way. Most of the guards have high school education, and they saw that I was trying to pursue college, and they thought it was a joke as well. So they created extra barriers. I had the incarcerated people thinking that it was a joke as well. So, it was just all of these different hurdles. Like, even the application requires that you write a personal statement. I had to write it out by hand, send it to an individual who then proofread it, sent it back to me. I rewrote it, then I sent it back again, and then someone finally had to type it up. So it just ended up taking months and months to put these together. But I finally get them all together. and I had to have someone on the outside press the submit button because it had to go through electronically. And almost like the next day. So we've been I put together like this friend factory, which I was fortunate enough to have like these additional support that this mentor kind of helped with. And they've been putting in work for 6 months, and then they pressed the submit button, and a day later, rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. I was rejected from every single place except for St. Louis University, where that mentor was on the admissions committee.
Wow.
And part of that, for each of the applications, I had to check the box. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Please explain. So I checked the box and I scrabbled up some type of explanation. And apparently, for most of the places, one of the places actually informed me that it was because of my criminal conviction that they couldn't give me a scholarship. And because of that, they couldn't accept me. So I know with, some level of certainty that it was indeed my conviction, that question, that held me back. But for the St. Louis University application, I had this mentor who was going to bat for me behind the scenes. And so I got into St. Louis University when I was released. And, as you were mentioning before, I, completed my MBA and PhD at the same time. I ended up completing at the top of my class. I ended up completing in a shorter time than most of my peers. I ended up moving on to Johns Hopkins University, which is the #1 medical institution in the country. We were also #1 in endocrinology at that time. I moved into the endocrinology department there, eventually became faculty at Hopkins for a while before then moving on to Howard University, where I'm at now as a tenure track assistant professor at the College of Medicine. I also hold some visiting professorships at Georgetown Medicine. And I decided to take the talents across seas, to use LeBron's language, taking my talents elsewhere. And I also hold a visiting professorship at Imperial College London in the UK. So going back to those years
What
ago,
a journey, man. That is just like, just when you put that together, right? It's just like, these are like some who's who of colleges and track, and even somebody who grew up in a very pristine place might go on to get their MD and then settle in, and nothing wrong with it, but settle into a nice little comfortable place without that desire to go teach and do all these other things. And you just kept on going more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
And with your current nonprofit, I want to go back to something that you said as well. I mean, going back to the words and the power of words. The prosecutor said words, you believed the words, and your mentor said words, you changed your belief, and then you also had God's words about you. But then you're going into this whole spot about going into apply, and all the negative words from the guards, from the inmates, but you holding on to God's words, your mentor's words, and then you getting your letters out there, and then the words of the college, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, and then your mentor. And so I just go back to this mentor again and again, and I know he's huge in your story as well, and just the power of having someone believe in you. Years ago, I did this video on Facebook, just said that you need to lend someone your belief, because some other people are not ready to believe in themselves, and you need to lend them your belief. It's what I get to do as a coach. A lot of the coaching that I do is just, hey, I believe in you. You can do this. And you had that person, and now you have an organization of people who are doing it. And so it's so powerful. I love that you bring that out. And I just wanted to highlight that story, and just to give a shout out to people like your mentor, now what you and your other people are doing in this organization to believe, and now you as a professor doing. Is that, if you go back to the resilience and inner strength, and if you were just to say, what are just some keys, just even a bulleted list of how do you get through things when it's tough? When we have pandemic, we have Ukraine, we have turmoil, we have crazy weather, all those things. What do we do when the going gets tough? What would you point to?
So, I mean, one, I think leaning on your higher power is a big thing. Was a big thing for me. The other thing that I would mention is really to hold on to your integrity. So as I was mentioning, I kind of built this integrity that where I was willing to do the right thing and do good, even if that meant potentially bringing harm my way. So I reached this level that integrity of believing in my beliefs so fully, and believing in doing the right thing so fully that I was willing, to have harm brought to me in order to continue doing good. So I think, holding on to your integrity, like having a set of beliefs and holding to those beliefs and really rooting those beliefs in faith, I
Yeah.
think will, keep you on the right track. And then I think for me, there was a level of patience there was a lot of uncertainty along the road that I explained within the book, and I didn't know what was the next thing that was going to happen. And I had a level of patience. And again, that patience really came on leaning on my faith and believing that, my higher power would take me to that place that I needed to be. And in that process, I conditioned myself to understand that maybe I was going to get out, and maybe I wasn't going to get a high paying job because there was going to be these barriers. But I conditioned myself to be okay with being able to enough to support myself and have my family and have my life and have my values and integrity. And that was enough, conditioning myself to say, like, that would be enough for me, was part of the role in getting through that. A lot of people, when they're faced with the barrier, it's like, unless I jump over it to this level, like everything else is a failure, So they only have their eyes set on the one thing, and to them, everything else is a failure. For me, I kind of had plans A, B, C, D, E, and so forth. Like, if I wasn't gonna get A, like B was gonna be okay, C was gonna be okay. And so I think that's one of the tough things. Like, people have their eyes set on a prize, and not getting that is considered failure. And for me, I had multiple things that I was going towards. So I think faith in God or a higher power, integrity, patience, and really conditioning yourself to see multiple outcomes.
Ah, man, that's good. Well, I love it. And people can find your book online on Amazon and elsewhere, but where can people find you and some of the work that you're doing?
The organization and book name is From Prison Cells to PhD. The full book's name is From Prison Cells to PhD. It's Never Too Late to Do Good. You can find the organization at Prison2Pro on Instagram and Twitter. You can find us on Facebook with just the name of the organization or book. You can find me at Prof, P-R-O-F _ Andrisse, so at Professor Andrisse on all the different social platforms. I wanted to leave, I know our time is almost up, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about the subtitle of the book, which is It Is Never Too Late to Do Good. I mentioned that, my family were Haitian. I grew up speaking Creole. I still speak Creole to my mom particularly, and many of my family members. And that subtitle is a phrase that my father used to tell me. And my book is actually dedicated to my dad. And, when I was getting into all this trouble and moving deeper into selling drugs, he used to tell me this phrase, "Il n'est jamais pas trop tard pour faire bien," which doesn't quite have a full English translation. The exact English translation is "It is never too late to do good." But the true translation of what he was meaning is that it's never too late to do the right thing, and it's never too late to reach your full potential. And so what he was, the message that he was delivering to me was that although that I was making these poor decisions and getting into this trouble, he had this belief in me that one day that I would see in myself that I can bring value and purpose, and I can, not bring value not only to myself, but to others, into the world. And, he was laying this foundation of like, I believe in you. I just need you to believe in you. And, he had this belief that I one day would have that belief in myself. So he had this like ultimate level of patience that I will wait for you to see that you can bring value into this world and you don't have to be doing these things that you're doing. And, unfortunately, as I mentioned, I ended up losing my father before I had the opportunity to really let him know that I started to grasp this idea of what he meant of, that it's never too late to reach your full potential and it's never too late to start doing the right thing. I started that when I was in prison, and that was, partly this idea of, I was willing to do good, even if it were to bring me harm, was, very much based on my faith and my father. And so this message is actually a powerful message to the criminal, to the criminal legal system, because our system currently doesn't believe in people. That's why we sentence them to life in prison. That's why we have such excessively long sentences for folks, because we don't have the belief that they can change. We don't believe in true second chances. We don't believe that people have the capacity to change. And that's why our system sentences people so long. And in my dad's eyes, he sees that everyone has that capacity for change. And, he was telling his son that, like, I know, like, there's a lot of things going on right now. You see the world through your teenage lens and there's all these things going on, but I believe in you. And I believe one day you will believe in you too. And that's part of the message that the book delivers, is that, through our organization, which we call P2P, we believe in you. That's what we tell the folks in the program. We just need you to believe in you. And once you get there, we will be there to support you.
Man, it's so powerful. And really, it's a story that people need to hear, whether sometimes we're not in that type. We don't think, well, that's really big. But whatever situation we're in, we can be a jail in our own mind. We can be incarcerated by our own beliefs, and that you can believe in yourself and find people who will believe in you, and to get you past that barrier in your relationships, in your career, in your parenting, whatever it is that you find yourself stuck in. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Stanley. Really appreciate it. And we'll put everything in the show notes as well. But it's been absolutely fantastic to have you share your story and your inspiration, your motivation to us today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Really looking forward to continuing to connect with you and your audience in any way that I can. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to all of our listeners, we do this to help you reach your full potential. And Dr. Stanley talked about that today. Now, if you know someone who will be inspired by what he said here, maybe someone who's just feeling a little bit stuck, share this to them, comment, like, subscribe, help get this podcast and this YouTube segment out to others to be able to lift them with resilience and inner strength. Until next time, this has been Advance with Mike Acker and Dr. Stanley Andrisse.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.